29th, 2017, we're here at the Laguna Woods History Center with Myra Neben, and my first question for you is, can you share about your education and professional training in journalism?
I can. I graduated from Ohio University with a degree in journalism, Bachelor of Science in Journalism. Did graduate work in Maryland at Northeastern University, anticipating a teaching degree in secondary education, but I never finished that because I went to work instead in my first, that was my second actually, real journalism degree with the Peabody Times in Peabody, Massachusetts, where I covered school board, zoning issues, and crime. Moved from there to Maryland, where I eventually became the city editor of the Bowie News, which became the Prince George's County News, and also did city council, education, court reporting, and crime reporting. Eventually moved out here, where I temporarily got a job with the Irvine World News because I had met Jeannie Keevel, who was the editor at the time. She was going on vacation, so I sort of substituted for her for a while. And the editor of the then Leisure World News had an opening and invited me to come interview for it, which I did, figuring I would be here temporarily, you know, just for a year or so until I got my feet wet and figured out where everything was and got a job with a real newspaper, and discovered that I really liked it. I liked interacting with the people, liked the one-on-one contact with your readership, and so I stayed for 27 years.
What was it like becoming a reporter for the Leisure World News in 1977?
It was a much smaller community and a much more cohesive community. It was, everybody knew everybody, everybody was friendly. It was a much more closed society in that the board meetings were closed. There was little interaction between board members and the newspaper. Everything went through a third party. A lot of interaction between the residents and the newspaper because of the clubs. But in terms of the boards, it was a different kind of reporting. After each board meeting, for the first few years that I was here, after each board meeting, we would meet in either when it was an administrator or the general manager's office with the general manager and whoever was doing publicity for the board and the board president, and they would tell us what they wanted us to know and what they wanted reported. But the meetings were closed, even to the members of the corporations, to the residents. The meetings were closed unless they specifically asked to be there.
And you mentioned that Dixon Truby shifted this policy. Would you share about the role of how this happened?
Well, there were two people that were instrumental in shifting the policy. One was Dixon Trueblood, who was a member of the 30 Laguna Hills Mutual, and the other was Dinty Moore, like in the beef stew. And both of them were ex-newspaper people. And it was through them that the boards were actually almost forced to open their meetings, where they insisted that the meetings be more open. And at that time, they also, at the time we were able to go in, which was probably a year after I started working, must have been about 1978 or thereabouts, the television station, Channel 6, was also able to broadcast the meetings live. And so it took a different turn, even though there were board members, mostly on United, but also a few on Third, that absolutely refused to speak in public.
Would you share about your collaboration with Channel 6?
Oh, it was a fun time. I mean, it was interesting. Every week, on Thursday morning when the newspaper came, right after the newspaper came out. One of us, usually me, but whoever the reporter was, we would take turns. Sometimes we would go over to Channel 6 and do a short headline news broadcast. We also did some fun things on Halloween. This community used to have wonderful Halloween celebrations in the old administration building. Every department would dress up in a theme and come marching through the studio. We would narrate, we said Channel 6, and we would narrate what they were, what the themes were, and some of them were extremely creative. We would do parades. There were Channel 6 and Leisure World News we had a 15th anniversary parade, a 20th anniversary parade. Channel 6 would broadcast that. We covered live coverage of when the cityhood votes. We would stay late and do those. Those were one of the few times that Channel 6 was on late. Yeah, we did a lot of collaboration. It was kind of fun. We also ran, of course, the newspaper ran their schedule, the Channel 6 schedule. And yeah, it was a good collaboration. They were a good group. We were all, at that time, young and eager. Now we're old.
And you had a feature, correct, with collaborating with Rob Merritt. So there was, you knew him personally, of course, but you read the news in this forum. Would you share a little bit about that? About the show?
The news show that we did?
Yes. Is there with maybe some connection to Rob Merritt and how you may have worked directly with him?
Well, Rob was the prime reporter. He started as a child, actually, at Channel 6. He was another one that stayed, for a long time. Rob was a very, very personable young man. He's now a very personal old man, but he was a very personable young man. And we would share interesting facts about the community and interesting facts about the news stories. And Rob was just an excellent interviewer. Really enjoyed working with him.
Great. And not too long after you arrived to the paper, you became the editor. So
Yes.
will you share about your shift into this position?
Well, I started out as a reporter, because there was an editor. Very shortly after I got there, she left. It was a female, a woman. She left. She was sick, whatever, she just didn't come back. They brought in another young woman as the editor. She lasted maybe 6 months. Leisure World was a difficult community to get used to. You had to realize that you were dealing with older people, and you have to have a knack for it. And the gal that they brought in really didn't, and so she left, and I sort of was elevated to the position within a year or so. Became the editor.
And how did you structure things? Any differently?
We structured things differently because the community was changing. When I started here, this community had a administrator. Bob Price was the administrator. Everything of a news value was filtered through him. Very shortly thereafter, Bob was, for lack of a better word, demoted, and the community hired a general manager. We sort of, at that point, started to do more news. Things opened up a little bit with the boards opening their meetings. We were able to be more of a newspaper rather than just a house organ. We also ran a column at that time because it basically had started as a Rossmore house organ from Ross Cortese every week. telling the community, because there were still houses for sale. There were still places for sale. There were new communities, new areas being built. So Rossmore Corporation had to have its little say, and Ross did a column every week for the newspaper. So we started to become more of a newspaper. We covered, I mean, there were things that happened in the community, and we covered, I remember one meeting, I told you girls earlier, they brought in the editor of the Seal Beach newspaper at a community meeting, and somebody asked about why the Seal Beach newspaper, which was also the Leisure World News or whatever it was called, didn't run obituary notices. And she said very indignantly, well, we don't run anything in the newspaper that's negative. And then they looked at me and I said, well, yeah, we run obituary notices because our friends and neighbors want to know what happened to their people, and we don't view it as a negative. Everyone is positively going to die. And although it's not happy news, it's something that your friends and neighbors wanted to know. And we did things that sometimes were not popular.
Would you share more about the other columns and other features of the paper? So more about the club participation?
It seems like at that time, every club had a column, whether it was hooks and slices from the men's golf club, or the fishing club, or the shuffleboard news and the lawn bowling news. And for a while, until the company management changed, basically, for a while they all had their own special titles, such as Putter Patter. There was Putter Patter for the 9-hole women and Putter Patter for the 18-hole women. And the Scrabble Club had a logo. We ran a half page of winners of the Bridge Club news. Virtually every group had its own special column. They all wanted their own special, sports being a big highlight of Leisure World. There was, other than baseball, basketball, and soccer, there was almost every activity you can think of, from table tennis to shuffleboard to lawn bowling, and at the beginning, bowling, because we had a bowling alley over on Moulton Parkway, and there were a number of bowling leagues that we covered for a long time until the bowling alley closed. There were every club, because this was a closed community and a very club-oriented community. Virtually every group had something in the paper every week, an announcement of a meeting, program announcements. After a while, when space became a problem, we sort of had to limit it, and they could have, 2 announcements, 2 weeks before the meeting and the week before the meeting. But for a long time, it was like every single week they would be announcing the meeting. And then things changed with the internet. We didn't have an internet. We didn't have things coming in via email. We didn't have cell phones. So you had to get your information out via the newspaper. That was the only outlet that they had. And after a while, things changed a little bit, and when people became computer literate, and we quieted down with club information, with club news.
Will you share more about the technology changes that you saw in the office from either?
When I started to
Sure.
work here, we used, for those of you who remember, an IBM Selectric typewriter. It was an electric typewriter, had special codes on it. We had big sheets, like 16 by 20 sheets of white paper that you typed on. It was a special paper. And if you made a mistake on a letter, if you were typing and you made a mistake, you hit a special code that eliminated that letter and you could continue typing. If you made a mistake on a word, you hit 2 boxes and eliminated that word and you could continue typing. And you could hit 3 boxes at the end of a sentence, which would eliminate a whole sentence. It was an interesting technology. That paper then at our production plant was fed into his machine and came out in a long strip of paper that was fed into another machine and became typeset. Then we went to a computer system, a real computer system, not as advanced as what we had today. And I thought I would kill myself for the learning it for a while. And we were able, after a while, to do pagination. Again, differently than what we had. Everything had a number, and you had it was a much more awkward situation than today. And then the technology changed again, and we went to a more advanced computer system where we could able to paginate and see what was on the page and type and email. And I remember we got our first fax machine in the office, and that was just wonderful. I mean, because we could get notices from our other offices. I couldn't get them from people because nobody had fax machines. But we could get, instead of running back and forth with information, we could actually fax information from office to office. And that was really just a great thing, a time saver. Mm-hmm. And of course, then we got pagers. Eventually, after a few years, we got pagers, so we would know when someone from our other office was calling us, which eventually morphed into these great big cell phones, or car phones, or whatever, that were huge. You carried them on your belt, and as technology changed, things got a little easier and different. And of course, as everybody within the community became computer literate, we had the computer club, both the Apple and the Mac's computer clubs. Rather than having so many people come into the office, we got a lot of things by email. Mm-hmm. And it became easier because rather than having to have someone retype everything that was brought into the office on paper, you could just transfer an email to a Word program. Mm-hmm. So it became a little different, but it also changed the dynamic. Rather than having people come into the office as frequently, which was something I really enjoyed, it now became a little more impersonal. It's hard to relate to people via email. It's much more fun face to face.
What about the community's reaction to the content? So I'm imagining in the early years they would physically come in, maybe react to articles as well, converse about the paper.
Well,
and
in the early days, everybody was really quite content with things that went into the newspaper. Mm-hmm. It was a training process at times, because in the effort to be a newspaper, we had to train people to get away from the using personal pronouns, and to try to write in an impersonal way. and it took some time, and we were a newspaper, and I was the editor, and that was the way it was going to be. And if we changed something, so be it. We tried not to change content, but we did change wording to actually reflect newspaper style and become a real newspaper. Not everybody was happy with it, and we had some interesting conversations with people. And I do remember, and I have to just as an aside, some of the funny things that happened. We had a gentleman who was a member of the billiards club. Billiards was, it may be still very popular in this community. There were 2 billiard centers, one at Clubhouse 1 and one at Clubhouse 3. And he came into the office one day and very quietly handed me $2 and suggested that maybe we could give his club a little more publicity. And I handed it back to him and said, "Thank you." I said, "We'll do our best for you, but really, you don't have to bribe us."
That's great.
And of course, in the sense of bribery, it wasn't, but in the sense of getting things. Christmas was always our wonderful time. People here are extremely generous and fun. And we would end up with cookies during Christmas and boxes of See's candy. And I had one wonderful little lady, rather than bringing Christmas gifts, rather than bringing candy or cookies, would always bring us a book of stamps, which I thought was was really useful.
Sure.
Really, really loved it. She just liked us, and she would bring us a book of stamps. We had at one time, I can't remember whether it was a special occasion or not, may have been somebody's birthday, the Melody Men, which was a choral group, pranced into the office one day in their garbs and serenaded us, just because it was fun. We'd have some really fun times, and people would come in and sit and chat and tell us about their histories and their backgrounds, and some wonderfully interesting people. And it was nice. It was nice. It was a very close-knit, very good feeling.
Neat. I want to take our conversation back to some early experiences. I want to find out from you the first time you even learned about Laguna Woods and what you had heard about it and your initial reaction.
I knew nothing about, and it wasn't Laguna Woods, it was Leisure World.
That's right.
I mean, it was Leisure World. I had heard about Leisure World because where we lived in Maryland was not far from the Leisure World in Columbia, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew of the concept, I knew of the community, but I had no idea of this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about it while I was actually working for the Irvine World News, because the editor of the Irvine World News, Jeannie, was friends with the then managing editor of our 3 newspaper of the Golden West Publishing. The first time I came here after I was hired, I drove, because I was interviewed and hired at the Saddleback News office, not at this office, which was the administration building, which address was on Valencia. First time I came here, I drove up and down Paseo de Valencia looking for the building. The building was not visible from the street. You went from the real estate office on Valencia to Wells Fargo Bank, but even though the building address was on Valencia, you couldn't see it. It was, you had to come up that little street. I drove up and down and up and down. I was gonna be late for my first day at work, and I finally stopped somewhere and used a payphone to call and say, "Where are you? Where are you?" To locate this office. But when people came to the office, you had to give them, if they hadn't been here before, you had to give them very specific instructions. You have to turn on La Plata on the little street, because otherwise you couldn't find the building. The old administration building was it was originally a Rossmore sales office. It was a great building, one-story building with big black windows, big entryway with wonderful, wonderful trees out front. It's all gone, of course, now. Leaked like a sieve. Had been, rooms were moved every which way, until eventually, of course, they sold it and moved. But it was a different, different atmosphere, much more closed, much more open in concept, but a closed society.
Would you share a little bit more about the infrastructure? Gate 14 was just open, you mentioned.
Gate 14 was just opening when I moved here. There was no traffic light between gates 1 and 5. I think that came later. There was nothing at the 9-hole golf course had not been built. There was, of course, the Home Depot Center was not there, and the Administration Building Center was not there. The Clubhouse 5 was not built yet. There was Clubhouse 6, but not a Clubhouse 5. Where the 9-hole golf course was supposed to be a lake for fishing, and then somebody decided that, well, maybe that wasn't I think probably Rossmore lawyers said, hey, that may not be such a good idea. You run the risk of somebody falling out of a boat. So that became the 9-hole golf course. The Towers was new. The Towers had just opened. The houses inside gate 9, what was called the Leisure World Estates, hadn't even been started yet. Those were the premium houses. Gate 14 was just opening, and of course it was difficult because it was in the flight path of El Toro Marine Base. So airplanes, the jets came in directly over, they came in actually over where the maintenance center is, but they sort of veered a little bit towards gate 14, so they came very close to gate 14 and over the golf course. If you were on the golf course at that time and a jet was coming over, you felt like you could almost reach up and grab the landing gear. I mean, they came over low and loud. Clubhouse 2 had a fair number of meetings, and often whoever was speaking had to stop because of the noise of the jets. And of course there was a legal limit at the time via a Marine Corps ordinance that you couldn't have more than whatever number, at a meeting, just in case, God forbid, something happened. But those planes came over Clubhouse 2 and Clubhouse 4, and they were noisy. Constant complaints from people, some of them interesting, who complained about the airplane noise, the noises of the jets, and then people who were very grateful that they were our jets that were making noise and not from somewhere else. And then we had some people who insisted that the jets were flying over at night, and 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they had it all. Unless it was an emergency, the Marine Corps stopped flying early in the evening. But Leisure World was very supportive at the time of the Marine Corps. I mean, a lot of ex-military lived here, and of course a lot of ex-military lived in the area, and they were very supportive of our troops.
Would you share a little bit more about that relationship? I know that would affect a community living so close to the base, so would you?
In the very early days, and this was actually before I started to work, this was during the Vietnam War era, we had a group from Leisure World that would go to the base and actually meet the military men, the servicemen that were coming back from Vietnam. They were, we had had a lot of support, this was a very patriotic community, even with the noise of the military jets. Had a lot of ex-military here who were very upset when the base closed because they used the PX. A very, very patriotic community. Big parades on Memorial Day. The American Legion would invite the military in. We had a lot of speakers from the military, and it was very ultra patriotic community, wonderfully patriotic.
Do you credit some of the support, especially in the Vietnam where the country is divided about this, that maybe it's the war service that they themselves participated? I know there's some connection of military servicemen, World War I and II, who moved here.
Oh,
so
no, we had a lot.
What do you think the correlation with is?
Well, like I said, they were very supportive of the military. These were the people who lived here had lived through, many of them through World War I, and of course World War II and Korea. And they were extremely, it's a very homogeneous community at the time. I just want to say that without being, but it was a very homogeneous community of people. We had very few, at the time, the early community was probably 90%, if not more, white American men and women. There were very few foreigners in the community, very few African Americans in the community. And when, in the early days, when we finally had some African Americans move into the community, they were not readily accepted. I was a member. I was the first female member of the Kiwanis Club here, and I was a member of the membership committee. Now, this goes back a long time, and things have obviously changed. And we had an African American gentleman who was up for membership. And the committee was almost about to vote not to allow him in, and I got upset. I said some things that I probably shouldn't have said, and really lambasted them. And the gentleman eventually became a member, but it was very obvious that there was some discrimination in the community. Now that's obviously changed, but it was a very homogeneous community.
And you also mentioned, while we're on this topic of patriarchy, would you explore a little bit of that as well, of your?
Oh yeah.
Little bit.
Well, if you go back to to the early days, we're talking about the days when most of the wives stayed home. Very few of them went to work, and if they went to work, they were secretaries or teachers or nurses or whatever. But for the most part, they were housewives. They were which was fine, which was good. But it became a problem when you had women particularly, who had never written a check. We didn't have credit cards. Credit cards were not common, but they had never written a check. They didn't know how to pay bills. And they would come into the office, particularly, and really bemoan the fact that they never learned these things because their husbands always took care of it. With later things changed as women, more modern, more educated women moved into the community. But the boards there were very few women that served on the boards. I think we had a woman here. I mean, she was a wonderful lady. She had been one of the early female doctors in the country. She was wonderful. But she was unusual. I don't think we had very many female lawyers, if any. I mean, God knows there were no female accountants. They were just very, they stayed home and baked cookies and raised the children. And there's nothing wrong with being a housewife. But today's modern housewives, know how to keep the books, know how to write checks, know what a credit card is. Those ladies didn't, and that many of them were absolutely lost when their husbands passed away, and they were on their own.
Would you share about your role knowing Ross Cortese personally and that interview that you conducted?
Ross was a very dynamic person. You had the feeling that you were talking to Don Corleone. That that was his persona. Ross was Italian. Ross was the leisure world personification of the Godfather. Strong personality. What Ross wanted, Ross got. When I interviewed him, I was sort of intimidated. He was a very intimidating personality. Now at that time, as I recall, the interview had to do with the project he wanted to develop where the Home Depot Center is, where the Staples is located, for the coal company, KOLL, this coal business. It was the Coal Business Center. And he was looking for Leisure World support for that. And of course, people here were all upset because of traffic and whatever. They did not want it. But he was determined. And he made it known that he was going to develop this, and Leisure World people be darned or damned. Of course, it never did get built. The economy went downhill. He was just at the point of our big recession, and it never did get built. But he was very, very determined. What he wanted, he was going to get. Ross managed to intimidate, I suppose, the Board of Supervisors, and got permits for all kinds of things, for all kinds of buildings. he had, yeah, he was a big supporter. And of course, he was friendly with Supervisor Tom Riley, Colonel Tom Riley at the time, who was the county supervisor for the fabulous 5th District down here. Ross was he wasn't a big man, but a very intimidating personality.
And you mentioned his favorite restaurant.
It was called 2020. It was a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant on Alicia Parkway, little Italian restaurant. And he took me there for lunch one day with a bunch of other people and introduced me to spaghetti alla vodka. Spaghetti with vodka sauce. But that was his favorite. It was called 2020. I don't think it hasn't been there probably for years, but it was called 2020. And he and a couple of other people, Al Saressa, who was the board chair for Rossmore Corp, and Al Weingarten, and a couple of others of his buddies.
Would you share about your readership survey you conducted?
I don't even remember what year it was.
Okay.
And it had to have been before Golden West Publishing was sold to Media General, because it had to have been part of the sale. And a private company, an independent company was hired to do a readership survey. This was just after, okay, go back a little bit. When I first started work here, the Leisure World News was delivered to every household, every Thursday, to every household, via a contract, sort of, with the Golden Rain Foundation, in which residents paid like 3 cents a week or whatever in their carrying charges for the newspaper. The Leisure World News, the community, not the Leisure World News, the community was sued by the then Laguna News Post, which had to have subscribers by name in order to deliver its newspaper into Leisure World. Leisure World lost that lawsuit, a restraint of trade lawsuit. Leisure World lost that lawsuit. And after that, the Leisure World News went to a subscriber-only publication. And you had to literally fill out a card, become a subscriber, pay whatever it was. It was a nominal fee, but you had to be a registered subscriber. During one of the transitions, when the newspaper was being sold, an independent company did a readership survey and came up with a 99% readership, which they thought was, ludicrous. It was just impossible. But virtually every household in this community was a subscriber for whatever the nominal charge was at the time. But they had to be individual subscribers. It came up with a 99% readership. Later on, when readership started to dwindle, we had a lot of people, a lot of subscribers, but we also had people who just liked to walk into the office and pay their quarter and buy a newspaper every Thursday. They'd be out for a walk and they'd come in and they'd buy their newspaper rather than being subscribers. So we still had a very, very large survey readership. Of course, everybody wanted their club news, wanted to see their names in the paper, wanted to see, we had a people column, wanted to see the names of their grandchildren and their children and, proud grandma and grandpas. And, the little bragging column we had, the people column we had, so you could brag about your grandkids primarily. Nobody bragged about their kids, it was always the grandkids.
And would you share more about this change of ownership and the expansion with Golden West Publishing?
When we started, Golden West Publishing had 3 newspapers: Alicia World News, Saddleback Valley News, and Capistrano Valley News. It eventually added a few more, but then the newspaper was sold to Media General, which was a company out of Virginia. That's when they had to settle the lawsuit. And the company itself expanded because we actually bought the Laguna. The company bought the Laguna News Post and then expanded to various other communities with weekly newspapers. That was had to be about 5-6 years, maybe more, that Media General owned us. They didn't even know where we were. I mean, they had us, and they had a newspaper in Diamond Bar, a headquarters in Diamond Bar. But basically, they didn't even know where we were. When they decided to sell, it was bought by the Orange County Register. That was somewhere around 1994. And it changed, changed hands. I don't think there was any. That was the only other ownership from Golden West Publishing to Media General to the Orange County Register. Of course, the Orange County Register has since changed hands a few times. But when the Orange County Register bought the newspaper, they basically left us alone for the most part. In fact, they didn't even know where we were, and we were quite content with that. I don't think the editors of the Register ever even came down here. They let us run our newspaper, and we did, just fine. And we were a very profitable publication. Again, a lot of this had to do with pre-internet. And as the internet became more popular, it stole advertising. We used to have newspapers used to have very large classified advertising sections. That all but disappeared with the advent of the internet. And although the newspaper was still very profitable, space shrunk. News space. As advertising space shrunk, news whole space shrunk. And we sort of had to put limits then on how many, columns couldn't exceed more than 250 words. And things became a little tighter and a little more difficult to run, to do. But that was the way of newspapers throughout the country.
Right. It's a general trend.
It was the general trend. News holes shrank as advertising became less.
And you saw the conversion in part, you shared, to e-readership and such, so up until your retirement. So would you share about how your readership changed and just content?
Well, the readership changed because, in part, because the makeup of the community changed. From being a very homogeneous community, we had a lot more other ethnic groups moving in. A very large Asian population started to move in. In part, they weren't newspaper readers. So they really weren't as interested in buying newspapers as the older population were, and readership did begin to go down. It also went down with the internet. Where you could get your club news and your club information and exchange information with other people via the internet. You didn't need the newspaper quite as much. Eventually, the boards, I'm sure, posted minutes of meetings and things on the internet, and the community has its own URL. And so you can get information that way. So readership began to change considerably.
When you are working with this community, were you ever a part of these clubs or organizations?
The only club I ever joined was the Kiwanis Club.
Okay.
And they needed a female.
Okay.
They needed a woman at the time. I was their first woman member. That didn't really, I didn't last actually terribly long, a couple of years, it didn't last very long, but yeah. Eventually other women joined, and I was able to sort of, but yeah, no, I don't think I ever joined any clubs here, in part because it would have been really unfair. It just wasn't right to single out, any club. So, I'd speak to clubs, I'd go to club meetings, but I never,
joined formally.
Yeah.
What was it like being a resident outside of the community while supporting the community inside?
Was fun, was wonderful. Oh my gosh, I had my first formal gown to wear because I was going to parties, they'd have wonderful dinners and parties and we were invited to all kinds of things. My husband was frequently introduced as Mr. Myra Neben, which, bless his heart, he sort of got a kick out of. It was, there were some great parties. The clubs invited, politicians. This was at the time, way back a few years ago, a very Republican community, and the Republican Club had just, great, wonderful events. There was also other clubs and whatever, just because I was the editor, we got invited to all kinds of great parties, great food, glass of wine here and there. Oh yeah, it was very social, extremely social. People love to party.
Would you share about the incorporation of Leisure World into the cityhood and officially becoming renamed Laguna Woods Village in 2005? So about that shift that you perceived?
Leisure World was part at the time, way back when, of the Saddleback Coordinating Council, I think it was called. So a group of residents, of people from various Saddleback Valley cities, Mission Viejo, Lake Forest, Del Toro, etc., who met. Saddleback Area Coordinating Council, SAC. And they discussed early on, must have been the late 80s or thereabouts, started to discuss an effort to become a Saddleback Valley city. And that never quite got off the ground. Mission Viejo decided it wanted to go its own way, and then Lake Forest wanted to go its own way. And Laguna Hills, and Leisure World at that time had a Laguna Hills post office. The post office was Laguna Hills, not Leisure World, not Laguna Woods. Laguna Hills offered to join with Leisure World in becoming a Laguna Hills city. Now this was also after Irvine made a run. This was during Ross Cortese's attempt to get the coal center. Ross had gone to Irvine and suggested that they annex Moulton Parkway, that they cross Lake Forest Drive, come up Moulton Parkway, and annex the area that included Leisure World and what his coal center would be. And Irvine had along with Rossmore Corporation, had a secret meeting in which they invited the board members. Of course, nothing here is secret,
Right.
was ever secret, which they attempted to convince the mutual board members in GRF that it would be a great idea if Irvine annexed Leisure World. Irvine eventually said, no way, it was just too complicated, but that's what Rossmore actually eventually wanted. Well, when Laguna Hills decided to go for its cityhood effort and was going to include Leisure World people got all upset because, gee, that would mean that we'd have to support all those parks for children and schools. I mean, we don't have children. What most of the people did not realize was that Leisure World people pay school tax. Part of their real estate bill includes a tax, school tax out by Valley Unified School District, whether or not there are schools here or you have children in schools. But that was, one of the rallying cries. Well, we don't want to have to pay for parks for kids to use and soccer fields and baseball fields and so forth. They voted totally against it. It came up a second time, and again, Leisure World people, no way. The third time, Laguna Hills said, forget Leisure World, we'll go on our own. And they became a city. Leisure World didn't really have a tax base. Laguna Hills took them all. I mean, that was going to be part of Laguna Hills. There was no tax base here. There's no revenue. There's no businesses at the time in Leisure World. Don't think the Home Depot Center was developed yet. I'm not quite sure. Willow Tree was fairly new. So Leisure World really had to scramble to find a tax base. And of course, the big problem was that you have a private community and legally you can't use public tax money to support a private community. So most of what Leisure World was paying in real estate tax was going to other places, because you cannot use public money in a private community. What tipped the balance was the El Toro Marine Base. When it was going, there was the effort to make the El Toro Marine Base closed. There was the effort to make it a international airport. And Leisure World, being an unincorporated area ruled basically by the Board of Supervisors, which was in support of the airport, Leisure World de facto became a supporter of an international airport. That did not sit well. I mean, the last thing they wanted it was enough that you had the Air Force, that the Marine planes coming overhead. They were our planes. That was fine. They didn't run at night. They weren't flying at night. An international airport would have made planes overhead 24 hours a day, every single day. That did not sit well. That basically was one of the things that tipped the balance when cityhood came up. And they voted they actually did not vote very strongly for it. It actually was a close vote. But that's what, Leisure World became a city. Now, of course, when Leisure World became a city, they had to pick another name. Couldn't be Leisure World, because Leisure World, it was a copyrighted name of Rossmore Corporation. And Rossmore Corporation wasn't giving it up. So they had to pick another name. And they came up with there was a whole bunch of names, and Laguna Woods actually was the one, that won and became became a city, but the name changed with the cityhood vote. But the El Toro Marine Base closure and the international airport threat and Leisure World being in the column of supporting this because it was an unincorporated area actually was a big factor in becoming a city. They did not want to be in that column, in that with the Board of Supervisors.
And of course you were involved with the commemorative 50-year book. So would you share
Yes.
about how you became involved with this project and your role, please?
Well, Bob Ring, who was, the former mayor, former GRF president, former whatever, called me one day after I retired. This was a few years after I retired, and said, "We're writing this 50-year commemorative book. Would you like to help?" And I went, "Yeah, sure, why not? Why not? It can be fun." Bob and I were friends. It was a good time. It was a fun thing to research and to write and to do. And the book came out beautifully. Do you have a copy?
Not on hand, but on site I know there's plenty
Yeah, there
circulating.
are.
So
Yeah.
yes.
Well, it'd be nice to show it.
Yes,
It'd be
that's
nice.
right.
Yeah, it was a fun project. It took us a couple of years. Actually, we started about 2 years before. Had a lot of meetings, a lot of research, a lot of, went through a lot of pictures with Pat and Bob and I. Interviewed a lot of people, gathered a lot of information. The book came out really nicely. It fun. Just a fun fact: Leisure World's anniversary, which is September 10th, 1964, was when it was officially open, when the first people officially moved in. Well, September 10th is also my anniversary.
Neat.
So we always celebrate it together.
That's nice.
It was sort of, something that I felt, wow, gee, that's why I'm here, because I have this, I share the anniversary.
So I imagine just you spent some time with Bob in the archives and covering and looking. I'm sure plenty of your own newspapers.
All
Yeah.
of our own newspapers. I mean, they were gathering newspapers from the very, very beginning, of course, before they were digitized. So it was all the old newspapers. In fact, we had given them, the Leisure World News, we had books of newspapers that the company had. At one point, we were these great big books of newspapers, and we donated them all to the Historical Society, along with a lot of information. And if when I look back, when I was looking in the files, particularly of pictures, I could turn over the picture and note in the back our old notations about cropping and whatever, newspaper, how to crop pictures and what percentages and whatever that we used in the old days when we had cropping wheels. So yeah, a lot of the pictures and a lot of the information, a lot of the articles, and a lot of, came from the Leisure World News, which was before the Historical Society, which was our archive. We had tons of information that we just turned over here. It was a lot easier for them to store it than for us.
And want to explore how you and the community celebrated in 2014. So just a little bit about your personal events and when
I know there was a big party.
Yes.
We went to. It was a lot of fun. I always love the parties because people here dance.
Mm-hmm.
You get there, you have an orchestra, and people actually dance, and I love to dance. I drag my husband out to the dance floor, but I love to dance. And unlike parties that I go to with my friends, people here dance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, the Historical Society had its big event, and a lot of people, a lot of the old timers, came out of the woodwork and then helped celebrate. There was some good good parties. And it was,
Sure.
You know, 50 years is a long time for a community, a private community, to celebrate. Of course, this isn't the oldest one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right,
You know,
Long
there
Beach
were,
and
well,
others.
Seal Beach and Walnut Creek, and then there were a couple back east and in Arizona, so. But this is the largest and was actually the most successful of the Rossmore Leisure Worlds.
Did you get involved with the Historical Society prior to this book? So other than giving these private holdings to the archive, were there any other relationships that you've had with
Only
old board members?
No.
No? Okay. And just kind of being on site and doing this interview today, more of like a reflective question. What do you see for the future of the society and your hopes for it?
My thoughts on this community is it is a unique place to live. When the community started, actually the age limit was younger. You only had to be 52. Now it's by virtue of, I think, the legislation, the senior community is now 55, but at the time you only had to be 52. But that it's a unique place to retire. It has every type of sport you could want, other than baseball and basketball. And at the times, we did have a group that played baseball outside of the community, a group of men that got together and played baseball. And at times, we had actually basketball in the gym, but not as a formal group. But activities abound. Everything from, tennis, table tennis, to music groups and theater groups, to learning opportunities, to economic groups. It's a great place. It's a great place to live. It's a very accepting community. Got all kinds of people that are here now, and it's a very it's a fun place because you have the various ethnic groups. So, it's kind of neat to go to an event for the Korean group and watch dancing and food, or the Chinese or whatever. It's just a fun place. A nice place to retire, and relatively quiet, if you want, except for the sounds of the fire engines and the ambulances. It's relatively quiet, and security. Security was always a big selling point for this community. Yeah, there are always going to be some issues, but not like there are in the outside world. Once you're in through those gates, it's a much more secure, comfortable. The landscaping is always upheld beautifully, so you can walk and exercise and go to your gym. There's plenty of shopping. You don't have to go far to the mall or the supermarket. I understand we have a new supermarket opening at Willow Tree. Yeah, there's a new supermarket opening at Willow Tree, in place of Vons. So that'll be nice. It's just a good retirement place. And not everybody who lives here is retired. In the, quote, old days, virtually everyone was retired. Now you get a lot of people who are moving in their late 50s, early 60s, who are not retired, who are still working. And that's a good, comforting thing, too. But they just want that little bit of security. So, great place, lots of activities. If you don't find something to do here, it's your own fault. There is an activity for just about every taste. If you don't find something to do, it's because you're not trying hard enough.
Any other closing thoughts on your own experiences? But you've covered it well, so if there's anything else you can add.
Oh,
to
I
the
enjoyed
record.
the 27 years that I was here was very both interesting, exhilarating, exciting, fun, and it was a learning experience because of all the highly intelligent and interesting people that I met, from early educators to female doctors to people such as the gentleman who was the father of the NASA safety program. You know, just exciting people that live here and that are still here, that have done some really exciting things in the world. And they have a lot to teach. A lot that they can teach the younger generation. And hopefully we still have groups that go into the schools and interact with younger people. And I hope they keep that up.
Great. Well, it was a pleasure conducting this interview with you. So that concludes our set of questions. So we appreciate your time and creating this body of work for future listeners.
I enjoyed being here. Thank you very much for inviting me.